Hello everybody, welcome to today's Critical Thought. I am Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Our subject today is going to be Anthology Storytelling. If the graphics over there haven't clued you in, we're going to be talking about the Twilight Zone. I've also added in a little bit more stuff around. That is not going to be the final draft. As time goes on, I'm going to hopefully be able to make some stuff in Photoshop and get some fancier looking graphics. But if we're going to be talking about the Twilight Zone, we need to set the mood. So, please enjoy my little attempt at honoring Rod Serling. You're traveling through another dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone. And we can also throw in Don't Break the Door a few times there, for those of you who watched the Twilight Zone pinball runs in my Pinball Arcade channel. But Twilight Zone is one of my all-time favorite shows, and I could spend 20-30 minutes and several critical thoughts talking more about that. But it was one of the first shows to delve into anthology storytelling. And for those of you who aren't aware of the term, anthology storytelling refers to shows where each episode is essentially self-contained. Actors, situations, environments are always changed in each new episode. So you essentially have a 30-minute to an hour-long self-contained story with no real crossover or overlapping with subsequent episodes. Now, there are some exceptions. Popular actors and characters may come back if their role would serve another story, which the Twilight Zone did several times with some of its more famous actors. For modern audiences, you probably know of an anthology show of American Horror Story, but we can actually go back even further than that with shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark?, The Outer Limits, Amazing Stories, Tales from the Dark Side, Goosebumps. There's definitely a horror fantasy theme with anthology storytelling. And one of the reasons is because these genres, especially horror, fantasy, and sci-fi, are so ripe for just imaginative situations and themes, it really lends itself well to this kind of anything can happen, every new episode, completely different story kind of feel. And the Twilight Zone was the originator of that. And very popular show, one of the best. I have, oh my goodness, it's heavy, the complete series of it on DVD. Someday, if there's ever time, maybe I can actually watch it. But what made The Twilight Zone such an amazing show, as well as a good showcase for anthology storytelling, is again how it was able to essentially reinvent itself every week. While you knew you were going to turn into some strange situation or tale, you never knew what exactly that was going to be. You could have something almost like a Big Brother Orwellian nightmare like The Obsolete Man. Could be something more lighthearted. Could be even just a bottle episode, like five characters stuck in a room. It's been a while since I watched these episodes. But again, they were able to basically choose whatever they wanted and make a story around that. So you never had to worry about, finding 10 episodes that are all horror, or being forced to watch nothing but comedy for an entire season. This was in no small part thanks to Rod Serling and the amazing writers he was able to get to create shows, as well as famous directors and actors to be a part of it. Now, going back to American Horror Story, it definitely falls on that line between a true anthology, because of the fact that it's not about a show-by-show basis, it's a season-by-season, which means there is obviously carryover between episode-by-episode of a season. But true anthology shows and stories are usually one-offs, and there are major pros and cons to them, and some interesting lessons we could maybe apply to game development as well, especially the adventure genre. So obviously the pros of anthology storytelling would be, again, the freedom and creativity. Because every episode is unique, As Rod Serling put it could be as timeless as infinity. You never knew what you were going to watch next. There was always surprise, and when a show hits its stride like the Twilight Zone did, it can lead to some imaginative and amazing works. The other advantage of an anthology is you don't have to worry about continuity and canon all that much. Since each episode is its own unique thing, there's no real carryover. You don't need to worry about remembering what someone said 5 episodes ago. So it's a lot more lax in that regard. Now, the problems, and there are a few big ones. The first one is, because everything is different, it makes it very hard to essentially get a groove or a standard of quality. You can have amazing episodes, you can have some that are just pure crap. And what can happen is people may want to watch those amazing episodes, but if they want to see more of that, they're kind of SOL, because these are just simply one-offs. Because of that, you also need to be very careful with how you write and direct them. Pacing is very important. You need to spend enough time dedicated to the situation and the environment, because it is a one-off, but at the same time you also need to tell the story you're trying to make. And one of the very interesting things about the Twilight Zone is they definitely hit a rough patch in, I think it was their 5th of their 6 seasons. During that 5th season, they actually switched to an hour-long format. So this wasn't 2 30-minute episodes. This was one episode stretched out to an hour. And this is one of the very interesting things about pacing that in of itself could very well be its own critical thought. Because whenever you have to adjust for time or stretch or shorten a story, it dramatically affects the story you're being told. A good example that I talked about a year or so ago was Doctor Who, and how the original episodes or the original run were essentially 2-hour stories broken up into 30-minute blocks. Today, Doctor Who is an hour-long story with sometimes a 2-hour two-parter. Now, you would think that a 2-hour two-parter and 4 30-minute segments would be about the same kind of story, but it's not. When you have to account for commercials and essentially just how much someone's going to watch in a single sitting, that determines what you can and can't show in a story. What made the Twilight Zone so amazing, the 30-minute ones, was that they were able to quickly establish the pace and the situation, quickly establish who's the character or what's going on, and then let the story play out over the remaining, usually between 20-22 minutes. Remember, there were commercials back then. But the problem with that kind of anthology setup is it also puts a lot more work on the main team. The thing with the Twilight Zone was, because they got different directors and writers, it kind of helped to keep the workflow somewhat manageable. Remember, they're making an original environment, original story every single episode. When you have something that's a seasonal anthology like American Horror Story, that environment and those characters are going to last for how many episodes in that run. But for a true anthology, you need to essentially be starting from scratch every single week. And even the Twilight Zone suffered in some sense, especially with the later seasons, and again, the quality kind of dipped in some places. But I'm sure you're asking, we're about 10 minutes into this critical thought, what does that have to do with video games? Anthology storytelling, I think, could be a very useful or an interesting experiment for the adventure genre. Now, the main element of anthology, which is the fact that there really isn't a character or something tangible as a brand, definitely hurts in terms of mainstream video games. As we've seen over the last decade and more, characters have really become the brand themselves. Somebody doesn't see the Mushroom Kingdom, they see Mario or Bowser or Nathan Drake or Samus Aran and Jedis and Knights of the Old Republic or Star Wars, and I can go on. The point being, for an anthology story, there's nothing really I guess, a brand to attach to other than the name of the show or the name of the series. Again, with the Twilight Zone, every week was completely different. You could have a love story one week, you could have horror, you could have comedy, you can have disturbing visuals. It can be a very calm episode. You just never know what you're going to get each week. And that in of itself became the brand. But with video games, especially with people experimenting more with episodic storytelling, I've always wondered if we could see someone try an anthology setup. A few weeks ago, I posted a thoughts on Telltale Games and what happened to them, and in that piece I said I would love for them to explore their own original IP, something that they have complete control of and that they can make 100%. And anthology storytelling would very well be something unique and interesting, and considering the studio's pedigree for storytelling, that could really be a good, strong, I guess, foundation for them for future games. Again, you don't really have to worry about telling a concurrent story over 5 or 10 or how many episodes when each episode is its own unique thing. And considering Telltale has essentially built their own engine at this point and has modified and refined over the years, they have the means to essentially be able to do that kind of creative work. The question, though, is would something like that sell? I really don't know the answer to that. The Twilight Zone definitely worked back in the late 50s into the 70s, but we saw with modern retellings and even with modern attempts at anthology stories, it hasn't hit that same level of appeal. Now, part could also be the fact that the Twilight Zone was a haven for some of the most creative and best writers and directors and actors for the time. And a lot of anthology stories today, especially those of the horror genre, the majority of them are definitely aimed at kids. You know, Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark. The only one that's really been for adults has been American Horror Story. But talking about that show, that would be a completely different thought at this point. So, tell me, what do you think? Do you think that anthology could work today for a video game? And could even work for an action game? Imagine an action game series where every game is in of itself its own unique spin or its own unique tale and environment. Now, I know with that said, a few of you are going to point out about the Souls series, and that is a good point. Each Souls game has the same themes to it, but the environment and the landscape is always different. The history of the world is constantly changing, and if we start talking about Dark Souls, we'll be here for probably 30-40 minutes at this point. But it is a fascinating example of very unique storytelling and probably worthy of its own critical thought at some point in the future. But that is going to do it for today. Hope you enjoy my little soundbite. Hopefully YouTube won't flag me for that. And you can say goodbye to that floating eye in the corner. And I will see you all tomorrow for our next critical thought. Have a great day, folks. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, of course, share with your friends. It always helps out. Check out game-wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates of new content. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under Game Wisdom if you would like to donate and help contribute to keeping Game Wisdom going. Your donations can not only give us the monthly funding we need to keep supporting ourselves, but if we can hit some goals, it will mean more great content for you, and there are some nifty little rewards there as well. Thanks for watching this video, and be sure to tune into the next one real soon.